The next up is talking about Race Equity Commission, the DEI position, and what I'm hoping to come away with today is, even if it's just a plan to make sure we have a path forward for the coming year of how to get some of this done on the same page. I thought would be helpful is Quinn had done a kind of nice write-up of what REACT kind of went through last year in terms of the next steps and their input, and then so hoping Quinn can share that with the group, make sure everyone's up to speed, and then I believe Kylie kind of had I was able to rebrief what we talked about towards the end of last year on the possible options before us and our legal pathway. So, but if you want to catch us on, thank you.
Just to get everybody up to speed, kind of, this is clearly from my perspective as the chair last year, but as we all know, REACT was created basically as an ad hoc committee through motion. When I took over, there were a few, I guess, structural roadblocks that we encountered as a committee.
Sorry, yeah, the table there. Sorry.
A few structural roadblocks that we encountered as a committee that were thankfully highlighted from staff, from a legal perspective, kind of issues around OPMA, issues around communication. It's a committee that's based in community membership, and a lot of folks that were on the committee are organizers, and so a lot of the work that they wanted to do was kind of in between meetings, and so we had to figure out one, what the structure would look like while complying with the OPMA, and then two, we also needed to make sure that the committee was in compliance with the charter, which the charter states that any committee must be passed by ordinance or resolution of the council. I think is the ordinance. Okay, so just ordinance. So what we did is, I believe the first time we presented to the committee possible ordinance language was back in March. I think Brett Jetty drafted a great memo from us that mirrored the Bainbridge Island REACT. Bainbridge Island does not have any council members on it, so it was the way it was formed was very different than other community advisory boards in that it had council members on it, and it was specifically a council committee. So where we found some roadblocks along with the OPMA and compliance with the charter, another issue was, as the mayor put forth his DEI request for funding, the committee wanted to have input on hiring around that. What we explained to the committee is that that's an executive function, and we can't, as a council committee, veer into that due to separation of powers. And so they stated, and this is a committee where we're really trying to empower community members and listen to them. What they stated is they wanted to have more input on the DEI position and possible actions of the executive. And so what we got back to them with legal advice was, well, if you want to do that, it needs to be a commission where the mayor appoints, we confirm, and that power is shared, because we can't usurp that from the executive. So I'd say we went through probably like 3 to 4 meetings specifically where we were, probably more. Like this was the main thing of the year, was getting REACT and community members on board and getting their input specifically. So what I have, and I believe I sent this to you, but I'll resend it to everybody, is a track changes document of the original proposal that REACT put forward, then timestamp comments from all of the meetings that we captured with the approval of REACT, and so there's some things that already legal is like, well, this might not comply, and this might be an issue. But what I did do is I made a promise to REACT that I would present this to council for consideration.
Draft ordinance.
This is the draft ordinance. Yeah, I'm sorry. When I say this, I say the draft ordinance with all the comments on it. And so that's what I'm going to do today. Is I'm going to resend that to all city council. Look over it. Now it's as a whole body, right? We need to move as a whole body to pass an ordinance if that's what council wants to do, and we can accept their suggestions. We can reject suggestions. I will say one of the main hiccups towards the end was, and it happened at, I believe, the very last react was letting them, the mayor has the duty or the responsibility of appointing, the privilege, there it is, that's the correct, yeah, that's what I said. All of the above, the privilege of appointing members, and that we could not, either as a committee nor as council, dictate who will be on the committee going forward. So I think there was like a little backlash of like, wait, we're not going to be on a committee anymore, even though the majority of the terms have expired. So that's kind of my perspective to share, kind of a very 10,000-foot overview. I believe Kylie can add to that more substantively, and from a legal perspective, Kylie sent out a great article about community advisory boards to me, but I looked over. It kind of focuses more on like community advisory boards, specifically around like policing. I think was where a lot of the data came from, but that's where most community advisory boards are in the country right now. So it's really great data. I'll share that with City Council as well. And I know that the mayor has like thoughts on timing and what his administration would like to do as far as taking those recommendations or how the timeline of passing the ordinance should be. So I'm sure you have some words about that.
Yeah.
But at this point, I'll hand it over to Kylie.
Yeah, sure. So I think Quinn summarized the procedural history of what went on in the last year. As far as the recommended ordinance that came out of React, and we were I want to say the last meeting that legal attended was maybe October. And so we, for lack of a better word, did not want to be at the meeting saying, you know, that idea is not consistent with the charter and like shooting it down at that level. And so when you see the draft ordinance, the ordinance started with basically Brett cutting and pasting from what Bainbridge did so that everyone could see that this was an example of an ordinance. But there are things in the draft that I think are inconsistent. That was what Quinn talked about, that I think one of the ideas was that there would be a committee full of applicants which the mayor could appoint, and so that's the mayor can appoint who he wants, and the council can approve them. If the council wanted to say that, you know, once it's established, the council can delegate like their authority on appointment as to the committee. I mean, that's something you are able to delegate your authority in ordinances. A good example of that is purchasing, right? You do that all the time. You up the level. So so the council can basically take away some of their own authority in that process and delegate it, but you can't take away the mayor's. Does that make sense? Right. Okay. So if the council, and that could also be done informally. So if once the committee, if that's the direction that is established, if you want to have the committee do interviews after the mayor is, you know, he makes an appointment. It goes on, you've seen this process, it goes on study session. Right now, it's usually like, oh, nice to meet you, and you go on to consent the next time. Certainly the council can do other things. You could say, we would like this candidate, we would like our React committee to interview this person and make a recommendation before we consider the appointment. That's your process and your confirmation of the appointment. So there are ways to take that input and make it consistent with separation of powers. So just because we might say that it's not consistent how it's written, I think it's the letter of the spirit. So I think the spirit can be drafted in there either in council rules and procedure or in the ordinance. So other things that were in the ordinance that I think when you look at it, just to keep in mind, Bainbridge has kind of a work plan codified in their ordinance, and some of the things in that work plan, I think the council certainly want to implement, but it's not something that the council has considered and budgeted for at this time. Like a racial equity analysis for the city, that kind of thing. think that was stuff that was in the budget for papers to implement, and it was codified with the committee to be a part of the process. Certainly can happen in Bremerton, but putting it in the language before you committed to doing that and setting aside funds is kind of take a little bit of course, so you could go more general. The other thing is about the DEI position, and it's interfaced with this committee. And so, and the timing of that, because the ordinance as proposed references that position, but then we know that where it isn't filled yet, and we can talk about that process. And so I'm happy, I'm going to work with you guys, but those are some considerations. And I'm really going to think the article that Quinn referenced, I've shared it with Jeff, I've shared it with the mayor. I found it was produced, it's a national study on community advisory boards that was done by the NYU's law school on what makes community advisory boards successful and what causes them to fail. I think if you read it, you will see some of the things that we experienced in Bremerton and some things that we can do. And the thing that I took away from it is that if the community advisory boards aren't properly supported, they don't have staff support, they don't have funding, and they don't have their guidelines, they actually have been good because it feels like the members are not being respected of their time, and I felt like that I think it's a good article to read as we go forward, because drafting an ordinance is one thing, but the committee needs to be enduring, and that requires an enduring commitment, and more than just, oh, we have this and we can pat ourselves on the back for it. It's commitment to providing support and resources and supporting that partnership. And I know that there was a community conversation that had some ideas on how the committee, the members could be compensated, and other ideas about and strengthening it, but making sure that that's also in line with what is one feasible legally. Like, you can delegate some things, but you can't delegate like everything, and you certainly can't delegate the mayor thing. So what does advisory board mean? And having that really having a strong charter and having support is important, and I think also getting community input on it is also great. And so I urge you guys, I know Jeff, that should read it. It's important. It's not just a ordinance and the process of putting people on a committee and having confirmations. It's an enduring commitment that requires
really good, framing. And I just before back to Quinn, I'm gonna be broken record, but I just want to make it clear, we don't today we will not be diving into specific things about ordinance or committee or structure. Looking for hopefully a consensus on, is this the 10,000 foot level? Is it this creation of a commission by ordinance the path we want to go down this year? And then we would have dedicated time on study sessions to hash through it. So I just want to make that clear. But Quinn,
so and I'm glad you brought up the community conversation, because that's a piece I left out of that when I was giving you the 10,000 foot level. This also is coming from, if you guys remember, I believe most of you attended the March 8th, I know the mayor gave a welcome and attended the March 8th community conversation, where the committee, which I think at the height probably had 6 community members on it and 3 council members. It's not just them. They've been doing racial equity work in the community for a long time and had ties to a lot of BIPOC leaders. I believe Monkey Pie, who just got a 20 under 40 award, was there, along with a lot of other folks from the community and BIPOC leaders. And one of the main things that came, and it was the highest attended meeting that I've been to. I think we had about 83 participants from the community. One of the main things that people wanted was to strengthen REACT. And so when you're talking about, you know, thinking about these positions being filled with other people in the coming years, I know that a lot of folks on this council have a commitment, and the administration has a commitment to race equity. Just thinking about turnover, and you know, we've seen some folks in our positions that might not have that same commitment, and so codifying it and actually making it part of the BMC was really important to those folks, and the feedback that we got on that and strengthening REACT. That's good.
Yeah, let's go to thought specifically on that idea of if we are good to basically put as a goal creation of this commission via ordinance this year, or if there's any other action items specifically related to that. And I don't know, Mayor, I give you a chance because I know you've been thinking a lot about this, so I'm happy to get your input.
Yeah, thank you. So, and council, thank you
Jennifer on it.
for beginning a multi-million-dollar, multi-year investment and allowing me to work with you to bring in a diversity, equity, and inclusion director. Significant investment. And so I just want to highlight my process that I'm kind of working through in my brain. I'm going to share with you what I'm thinking, and then some actions already underway. I believe for this position to be successful, and I'm starting with this manager position, but you're going to get where this leads into this proposal. And so to be successful, we're going to need full community buy-in. And at least, very least, the full community needs to be heard. And so I'm putting together the two conversations, a small discussion, just to talk, to meet and brainstorm and bounce some of my ideas out there. The path that I feel strongly may be the right path, but I'm going to reserve judgment until I get to bounce this off of folks, is for us to bring in a consultant, contract with a consultant to facilitate a conversation with our entire community. And this needs to be wide-ranging. We need to be just to go at this tirelessly to ensure everyone gets a chance to be heard in several forums and get feedback on what does our city want from a diversity, equity, and inclusion directive. And this same effort will be conducted internally with staff. And so I'm sorry. All right. So and same effort will be done conducted internally, but for all of us externally, what does the public want to see in this position? And we all know our goal. Some of our goals are how are we serving everybody in this community, and so that's where the outreach has to come in. And this will help. You know, it'll help us in our service delivery, our public service and what we're doing. But it's going to help us also to refine what our RFP looks like, what our job description looks like. It's going to fine tune it. And most importantly, again, is to get those perspectives. And I want this done. This will be me, obviously, with your support and budget. It'll be on me to administer this program. And so it'll be obviously unique. You'll have more involvement, I think, than maybe any other time. But once we get the consultant hired, the professional, we stand back. We let the facilitation and support the facilitation process, the input data gathering process, and then of course collating that. Once that's done, we'll do it as long as it takes. Once that's done, then we'll work together to develop a recruitment and process for a DEI director. So that can be done in a number of ways. We'll work together on that. It might be the formation of a committee. You know, it might be, sometimes I've seen where you cast that far and wide, you get in your top 5, you do an interview, you do community interview process, you know, depending on how we want to do this. And so, we kind of just, we go through this process. And so what I'm hoping now is, you will let the process take over. So we develop the process, we get it in place, and then we let that take over. The director, the new director, is going to be an experienced professional in DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. They can begin to answer some of the questions on the Race Equity Advisory Committee. What the difficult, tougher questions are, what are we hoping to achieve with this? How will this committee, move our city forward? And so that won't be done by us who are untrained or an attorney. This will be done by a professional, vetted by all of us, helping us identify what type of committees that we do. And so what I'm asking from you is to let me work through this process. What this internal one I'm working on now will be to vet this idea, potentially vet some consultants, bring forward some options.
So if I can restate kind of and make sure I got it accurate, the couple paths we have to choose from, somewhat today is we could, prioritize and get in the next month or two an ordinance passed that creates a commission, and then same time recruit a DEI director, or we could work with a consultant, hire a DEI professional, have them give input to the existing ordinance, which I think is what you were proposing.
Yeah,
In that order of operations.
right. And so I'm proposing no, keep the ordinance, no action on it. Let the DEI professional, we're devoting a lot of money, and then let that individual drive, because that individual actually will, any committee that's formed, that'll be the person administrating the committee.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then for what others is, and then I think just for clarity on power separation, I know that in the charter, the council has the responsibility to define the roles and positions. Obviously not hire or administer, but we definitely have the power to define the role and responsibilities of that position. That words, but close enough. Yeah. So we will need to basically approve how that person interfaces. All right, so let's go. Yes, I think the 10,000 foot level of what is the path forward we want to take with the proposals on the table. And sorry, Jennifer, at first, and then on. Yeah.
So how come we can't do all this? How come we couldn't have a rich luxury advisory committee be your working group? And then somebody you appoint, this discussion group is already thinking anyway. And it could be with our approval as well, because you don't want it to just be that whole island concept.
Yeah.
Because if we're just keeping it in administration, you're still an island. So would it be possible to continue with an ordinance and your discussion group, which you're planning to work be the
Well, the ordinance, two different things. The ordinance will be in perpetuity. You are setting the course. This is the importance of your job for generations. That ordinance. We don't have a clear clear end game or output or outcome that we're looking for by this creation, because we are untrained in DEI. So I'm proposing we follow my process, and I'm hoping it'll be our process when we're done today. And then my recommendation, and we bring in somebody who is a trainer. This will be somebody that we are all agree upon. And this will be, again, this will be formed through this community conversation.
So with that, a no or a yes? React could not be your discussion group.
Me forming you creating an ordinance and me handpicking.
Can I rephrase it as, it sounds like one option may be pass an ordinance, start recruiting folks, start recruiting the DEI position. And then when they come in, we can always amend ordinances with their advice. Is that, I got that wrong, make sure.
No, I wasn't recommending to amend the ordinance. I want to challenge something about the topic, the notion of being untrained. We're assuming that our community members are untrained, but we have a lot of folks out there that are trained because they have lived experience, right?
Well, if I may say, I'm untrained. So,
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah, and so, and I,
Professionals in our community.
so, and also my education background, we've lived experience is part of it. But it's an important part, but so is education. So an experience, work experience. And so there's lived experience, there's professional experience, and there's education reviewing, especially when we review. I mean, a few of us have gone through this where we review case studies. We do this exhaustively when we can reach outside of our own experiences and read from other parts of the country, you know how it is, we develop an education background. So yes, I would challenge that we need to bring somebody in to help guide this conversation. I believe it has to be a trained professional. And ultimately it will be a trained DEI professional that will do this.
So I have a master's degree in public administration. Whatever that means.
Business.
Whatever that means, right? But, I mean, I guess as somebody that's trained educationally in this profession, I am suggesting to you that you harness the power of your community, who are the professionals for their community needs. And I implore council to go ahead and pass an ordinance for REACT. Now, whether or not he actually puts it in place, it's going to be up to him, right? He doesn't have to, but he doesn't have to get it started. But that's just my opinion.
Yeah, no, hearing your support for moving quickly.
Right.
And let's go on to, sorry, Mayor, yeah.
But the same,
My council's consensus on.
yeah,
Go.
before we get too far, if I indulge me for a minute, there is no intent to bypass that community in this process, already beginning as of this next week. And then throughout, there's no intent to bypass all that talent and experience.
Talk about, well said. What are your thoughts on the process going forward?
Here's our alternatives. Council drafts an ordinance, ordinances can be amended, or we're sorry.
Oh,
Or the mayor can proceed with hiring a consultant to consult with drafting an ordinance and writing a job description for the DEI person. Versus choosing amongst a pool of consultants, like people like Lucinda, for example. So these are our two options, and we can dive into them more deeply later today or during a study session.
Yeah, study session in terms of, if we're looking at the ordinance and number of people, interaction with the staff who report to, that we can all hash out in a later study session. Yeah.
Excellent. Then I would move that we take a 5-minute break.
Oh, but yeah, let's wrap up this topic. And then we'll get for public safety, but yeah, we got more to go. Yeah, Quinn and then.
Okay, thanks. And one thing, and I absolutely, I think we're all on board that we want this to be done right and be done in a way that it is successful. We don't want to set up the DI director for not being successful. We don't want to set up the commission/committee for not being successful. One thing in my brain, and this might be from the recent trauma of Roe v. Wade being overturned when we received a whole new slew of justices is, I've been on council a year and a half, and I've seen a ton of turnover on the council, and I've seen a lot of different political ideologies and a lot of different perspectives, especially around race equity. And so my personal impetus in moving forward, maybe, kind of that middle ground that I think Jeff was talking about us working on the ordinance while you are, creating the DI position along with the consultant is, I want something to really strengthen that's going to live beyond the folks that are on council now, because we have I haven't stated this fully publicly, but like I'm most likely not running for re-election. I don't know who your District 4 person is gonna be, and my seat's up in a year. Anna's seat is up in a year, and I don't know what, I believe that's true, right? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah, I forgot you as well. So that's my sense of urgency around this issue is we have the right people right now, and even if maybe Mayor, you don't like fill the seats right away, I want to make sure that we have something in the BMC that like, you know, I'm sure everybody woke up this week to the horrible murder that took place, you know, where this issue, I read an article that actually more murders have taken place since the George Floyd killing, and this is a really, really important issue, and I don't want to lose this really special group, in my opinion, of council members who can act on this, and then I get, you know, some opposition in the future. So I hear that. I think it's a balancing act, and that's, you know, I'll leave it up to the whole council.
I think we have a responsibility as a council to do whatever we can to move forward with this work. And realizing that the mayor and the administration has a very important role. So do we. And the thought of waiting until someone is hired, either a consultant or I can't remember consultants helping us with ordinances. But I've only been on several months. I'm very supportive of an ordinance moving forward to transition this committee to a commission. That would give the mayor the opportunity to build, you know, a commission that could be of great assistance to a consultant or to a DEI professional. I do want to support the mayor in this question of experience, life experience versus somehow professionalism and or professional role. Many people that enter the arena of being professionals in this world have lived a lot of lives. And they bring that to the table with them. That often compels them. Just as I wouldn't hire a domestic violence survivor just based on her lived experience to play a professional role, I wouldn't do that with this either. So while I value my own life experience and how it seasons my decisions, this is a professional position and needs to be hired as such. And I think I love the idea of a consultant because I think you can move faster with a consultant and it can be better informed. However, I would like our role to be active in that. And I think this ordinance, I hope that the two of you could go back into that committee or go to that committee and say, this is what we've done. And that committee will say, thank you. One last thought, Mayor, I strongly urge you to make sure you have representation from that committee. So on whatever commission or, because otherwise there's I've done race equity work. I ran the ADL, the World of Difference Institute, for almost 6 years. And you've gotta do things that are inclusive, transparent, and even if you don't like what you're going to be hearing, maybe especially because you're not going to like what you're going to be hearing, the optics, all of it, put all of it in the washing machine, and I think there should be representation.
So if I could jump in, the consulting and the community outreach process, that, Councilor, that's best directed. Once we get this process underway, we get a thorough That will be part of the process, to take in the input, to take in the research they've done. I would implore you, as a council, don't start something again with good intentions until we're ready. So developing the ordinance, if you want to continue to develop and fine tune it, passing it ahead of what I'm proposing, which I hope you'll buy into, gets a committee in place, commitment in place with no real idea of what the outcome is going to be from that committee. It just puts it in by name only.
Can I wrap up with everybody's?
Yeah, I just want to check, Eric, if you had any thoughts on which I just skip over, yeah. And if not, that's fine. I just want to your chance.
I'm hesitant to talk about this. Like, quite frankly, I'd like to know what the outcomes of this DEI position, what is the council seeing as going to be the outcome? I look at DEI and it talks about employee demographics, employee compensation, equitable, talk about hiring people within the organization. Is the council's, do you want to expand this outside of employee environment in the city? And give me examples where that's been put in place in other communities. I just have some serious reservations about what is the intent of the council behind all this. And I'm struggling with all this. And hopefully I don't get attacked for voicing that. I feel like I'm
No, it's good.
I'm sincere. That's why I'm quiet about it. I really want to know what your goal is in implementing all this.
Fair enough. Yeah, no, I think everyone should be able to ask questions. They're genuine questions and they're good questions. So, but Jennifer, yeah, you want to suggest?
No, I love that you asked that, right? Because you want to learn and you're open to it, is what I'm hearing. That question is, and the hesitancy is because maybe you want to understand it first. So there's a couple different ways the DEIs are generally implemented within institutions and municipalities and so on. And there's a community engagement component, and there's also internal, like, human resources component. So the idea is that diversity, equity, and inclusion it is to analyze barriers that prevent people from being part of the institution. And that can be not just race, there could be a disability bias within an institution. There could be a wage gap between men and women in an institution. There could be maybe there is a bias in the institution against LGBTQ, against trans, right?
I understand that part. Is that it? Just personnel issues?
I don't think so, because I think a number of us believe and see the data, right? I think most people on council, and I can only speak for myself really, and I'll let other people speak for themselves, but we recognize that institutional racism is intersectional with other biases that exist within our community still, even though we seem to have progress, there is still institutional racism, institutional sexism, institutional ableism, all these intersections that exist that prevent people from accessing jobs in an equitable way and also accessing resources within our community. So we could even, if we wanted to do a deep dive, we could, but I think that's the job of the DEI, is to analyze that data to find out where the gaps exist. Why, and sure, we're getting better at some things, but there's so much room to grow because there are people still suffering and who are unable to access at the same level as other folks, so that's something that a DEI can work out and would analyze and use actual data to show, which is, I know you just have data, So you want to see the numbers.
I'd like to see
And that's-
examples where this has been implemented in cities similar to.
Good call.
Yeah.
But. So fair to say that at this position, in the same way that, Andrea says, hey, here's my opinion and input on how we should do zoning, and Tom says, hey, I think we should allocate money to stormwater here. This person may give input on to where we can reallocate resources, update ordinances. That, but yeah, in addition to just HR, and then, yeah, I'm sorry, to try to keep, please finish.
Yeah, and so
I kind of jumped in
basically,
the question.
I really love hearing that folks, on council, this is just a council, I don't mean, we know you have your plan there, and I think it's a great plan. But I think that we need to, again, we had this community collective of how many different people were at the community listening?
I remember, yeah, 80.
83 people, and how many panelists did we have from our?
There was 3 pages of panelists, I don't know.
3 pages of panelists, people of color in our community, like they keep telling us what to do, and we are not implementing it, and like, I can't speak as a person of color, but they're tired of repeating the same ish over and over and over and waiting for us to implement these things, and this is one of the things that we do. This is the one small thing, what you're doing is another thing that we can do, and so there's no reason why they can't be together. We need to get this, it's already been time to do this, it is past time.
Kylie, you had some input, and then,
I was just gonna point out, so the consultant route is a route that the county took, and Judge Flood was involved in that effort, so she's already. So I didn't want anyone to not acknowledge that we do have someone with some experience and you obviously, we're talking about here, even though she's here. And Eric, I did want to mention, so whenever, the city joined the GARE network, that's the Government Alliance for Racial Equity, and it is a network of government professionals that are engaged in DEI. They have if you've been a part of a professional, like listserv type thing, it works very much the same way. And so I haven't been a contributor yet, but I'm a lurker. You know, I read what other cities are doing, and where I can tell you what other DEI professionals are doing in other cities, and it is across the board. It's looking at like every aspect of your operations. So for example, in planning, you know, historically, there were you know, if the city has engaged in a practice of historically voting public dollars into one area of town versus another, and that was done in a way that was along lines that were inequitable, and it could be you know, race, religion, or whatever, income, that kind of thing. That so public dollars went into improving infrastructure in one area of town and identifying that and, you know, changing that course so that your planning efforts are more equitably distributed. Parks programming, looking at that data, what are the demographics of folks utilizing the parks, and is it being, are parks being utilized in an equitable manner? And if not, is there a reason? Is there parks programming that is not inequitable in its space? And that's what a lot of this stuff is not intentional, it's outcome. And so their parks programming is geared toward the likes and dislikes of particular you know, demographic of your community to the exclusion of another. And you can look at, you know, pretty much any aspect of your municipal operations, looking at data and how that systems delivery can be done. Identifying if it is being implemented in a way that is inequitable, and then coming up with a plan for more equitable service delivery. And so that is what I have seen other organizations do with the community outfacing. The HR component is, of course, looking at income disparity. There's, you know, everyone's familiar with the statistics on what that looks like across racial and gender lines. You know, in the workplace generally, I'm not. And so there's a component of the work that is within the organization supporting employment, making sure that we don't have barriers to promotion, don't have barriers to opportunities, we don't have barriers between, similarly paid employees that somehow end up being inequitable, even if that was the intent. And then there's the service of the project. So I hope that helps, just from what I've seen.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Excellent. Yeah, so Quinn, and then, I think good to flush that out, and then I'll go with the mayor. And
Do we wanna
see if we have a consensus on, oh, yes, so Judge Flood, why don't we go?
Can we hear from Judge?
Yeah.
Butler?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, go for it. Sounds good. Yeah, and let me say this out loud, I don't want to ignore the people of color we have in this room, in this conversation. I am keeping in mind the hats that we're wearing in this room at the moment as blood, I'm sorry, as judge instead of, counsel. But, yes, please, if you have experience, and thoughts, say, yeah, please, Sharon.
So I'll just add that the county, Kitson County, went through a selection process with the RFQ. Address the issues of DEI. And part of that, the county commissioners. That were part of this selection process at that time. So it allowed for there to be input on the selecting of the consultant. Now, this wasn't necessarily to create a DEI position. This was to take a look at everything in the county on DEI. A little bit different, but still a selection process. And what I want to say is, when you think about the hurdles and you see the picture of what is equity versus equal, you see the individuals, 3 individuals standing at the person who's about 3 foot, the person who's about 5 foot, the person who's about 7 foot, you can see the fence. But the fence is limited, so you can't see through it. And then they give the individuals the blocks to stand on so that they to look over them. Then see that equity is taken out of it so that you don't need the blocks to stand on to look over the fence. This is the same thing that the individual is at first. So when you're having this conversation, remember, what is your income? What is the big picture? Which goes back to my comment. You have to look at it's not only what's happening at City Council, what's happening in the city, public works, which is huge, which affects judicial system, and what the process is there. Because this one individual who is selected isn't going to be yourself. So when there's younger is asking this question, it's a valid question. So what is this individual going to do? Are they going to HR? In essence, at the county level, they were looking at what's happening with employment at the county, but also looking at what's happening in our county. In multiple levels. So whatever you do, I it's up to us. But also to make sure that we should do and how you're doing it.
And I just wanted to add, thank you, Judge West. I really appreciate that. One of the documents that, and kind of one of my commitments for this year, is making sure people have that data to answer those questions that you're having. And I really appreciate you coming to the table with like a true sense of curiosity of, no, like, hey, this isn't my wheelhouse, like, help educate me. And I would love to, Judge White, I'm not sure if you were involved in this or if you've seen it, but the county has an amazing document, a strategic plan that I think was last updated 2022 or something. It's amazing, and the title is "Why Do We Center Race?" Right? Like, why is race part of the intersectionality that we need to be looking at in government? It talks a lot about upstream solutions to problems. Everybody knows kind of the parable of everybody seeing somebody floating down the river struggling to swim, and they keep sending people to save these folks, and somebody leaves and they run away from it, and they're like, hey, what are you doing? Like, we need to save these drowning people. He's like, I'm going upstream to figure out who's throwing people into the river, right? And that's the paradigm shift that DEI professionals can provide. And it is, you know, when we're talking about small businesses, well, let's look at the data. What are the barriers? Let's talk to BIPOC communities. What are the barriers of opening businesses? And based on the history of the United States, a lot of BIPOC community members are understandably very wary of government interaction for multiple reasons. So not just the personnel issues, but community engagement, all aspects of government. And I'll get documents. And Mayor, I know you said you really value, you know, the professional experience and you know, where people are getting professional experience. Just so you all know, I don't think you saw my resume when I applied, and everybody else has forgotten it. But you know, I'm not just coming at this as like, hey, I want to rush this through because react. But you know, for me, it's 20 years as you know, getting a sociology degree in crime law and social control that had a focus on race and ethnic conflict, getting a doctorate of law that had a lot of classes that dealt with racial inequity. I taught for 3 years in a 99% African-American low-income school before recruiting for an organization that put teachers into schools like that. I have 8 years doing employment discrimination, housing discrimination, public accommodation discrimination investigations. I was a trainer at the City of Seattle for the Race and Social Justice Institute, where I was teaching white folks to deal with their internalized racial superiority. I have a master's from Harvard, where I have a master's in education policy and management, where I studied at the Kennedy School that focused on race and ethnic conflict and human rights. So that's the lens that I'm bringing, and one of the resources I think that I can share with folks, especially white folks that are the majority of this table. You know, what is our role in race equity work? And I'm happy to share literature. I'm happy to share the things that form my urgency around this issue, and I want to do that. But I think these are valid questions, and I think our hearts are all in the right spot. And we, you know, just like you stated, just like Judge Flood stated, we want to make sure that this is done right and balance the sense of urgency around the issue with doing it right. And I think we'll start that on.
Well, going back to the mayor.
Can I ask just for a quick temperature check on
Yeah,
this issue?
well, so I'm going to go back to the 10,000 foot level and see, yeah, because we've got about 5-10 minutes left in this conversation.
We're all on the same page though.
Yeah, and so that's why I go back to council. Let's walk away in the next 5 minutes. If we got a council member consensus on making a priority to move forward with the creation on the ordinance, with the understanding it can be modified down the road. But Mayor, you wanted to.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, obviously, I think it's very clear. The one last thing is of every other committee or commission we do have a professional in that field that oversees every commission committee we have. And so back when this was all starting, professionals helped craft the role of the committees and commissions that we have. As of today, I am not a trained DEI professional. I have a lot of background. I have my MBA with an emphasis on human resources, so I do understand only from an educational standpoint some of this, but I am not even going to claim to be a DEI professional. I'm asking that we kind of follow suit. Planning director, planning commission, parks director, parks commission, council committees, you each have appropriate oversight from administration as the, on this one here, we don't have that. So I'm just requesting the DEI professional be a part of crafting something that's going to be here forever. Do it right, who wants to do it right?
That's fair enough. So what I'm gonna write down is, if we can, we can rank this later, like, it's gonna rank fairly high, but, that we keep as a priority to draft an ordinance to create a permanent race equity commission. Also to throw on there, as a priority to evaluate hiring a consultant to help define the DEI position, roles, and responsibilities, and give input. And I think those are the two big action items, but if I'm missing anything, and then as with those priorities, they do end up in the top in place, that would allow us to start getting study sessions specifically to dive into the ordinance, look at it, and then if we have specific concerns in there that the ordinance is either too specific or too general, we can have those discussions down the road. Is that I'm seeing thumbs up? Okay. All right.
Except you're not putting which one goes first. You should decide that today.
We should decide that today, yeah, and I'll put it more on the rankings. Well, so I think what I heard clearly was getting the ordinance in place should proceed as a top priority. It doesn't preclude hiring a consultant to help with the DEI position and gathering community input on who to hire for that position. Those can go in parallel. Okay. Perfect. I think that was productive. I need to take a restroom break, which means there'll be no one sitting in this seat, so you know. But that's let's take a quick 5-minute break. Yeah, I'll take a 5-minute recess.